The night air is cool and crisp. You can smell the faint, savory flavor of roasting apples or fires burning in the distance. A knock sounds at your door, and you open it to find a demon, ghost, and fairy princess standing on your doorstep, staring at you in excited expectation. What do you do? What is the appropriate response to very short relics of the afterlife, and magic itself, standing on your porch happily shrieking the phrase, trick or treat? Thanks to our traditions in the West, you know just how to deal with the situation. You snag a bowl of sweet offerings set aside for just this situation, and placate the little spirits with treats, of course. After all, it is Halloween. But where did this specific tradition come from? Why do we allow children to go door to door, extorting tasty treats from strangers? In order to understand this beloved, if odd tradition, let's look at the ins and outs of trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating is probably as old as the 9th century, but would have looked very different than today. It comes from an ancient Celtic holiday called Samhain, where it was believed that both the souls of the dead and the spirits of nature were able to pass into the realm of living humans and interact with them. Sacred bonfires were lit to ward off bad spirits, and big communal feasts would have been held, as communities readied herds for the winter, moving them into new pastures and slaughtering those that would likely not survive the cold. This would have also been the time when the community itself would be preparing their homes and each other for winter as well. It made sense to join together and share food resources, not just with other humans, but with spirits like the Fae and the dead. They would have set a stranger's place and allowed guests dressed as the old spirits of winter to enjoy a meal. They also would have left out specific offerings for the dead in order to keep them from harming the living. We don't know that guising and mumming, which was the practice of dressing up and going door to door begging food, was practiced from the very beginning. But we do have written records of souling, practiced during the Middle Ages in Ireland and Britain, where children and teens would go door to door begging for soul cakes, which were savory biscuits made with spices. Often, these youngsters were dressed as the dead or martyred. During the 1500s, we get written records of guising, but they all mention these as Samhain traditions, so we can guess that they're much older. Here, too, the practice was done by both young and adults, some blowing horns and leading parades of guised children, employing farmers to ready livestock for the Samhain feast. Since this was practiced in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Britain, and the Isle of Man, traditions varied. Some were wanderers and carried sticks through the community, veiled or painted, gathering nuts and apples to roast. Others practiced cross-dressing or carried decorated horse skulls to puppet, as they went door to door, reciting verses and promising mischief if the homeowner turned them away empty-handed. There are records from Scotland of young men blackening their faces with soot from the Samhain bonfire and collecting soul cakes, as well as jumping over each other and the cooling ashes of the bonfires. These celebrations often included drinking as well as feasting, and playing pranks on people that didn't give enough to the feast. In fact, in some places it was known as Mischief Day. During the 1800s, a major shift takes place in trick-or-treating, in that the Victorians were boring and wanted to tone down the pagan and general mischievous nature of Halloween, as it was then known by reframing trick-or-treating as something only young children should do. They would then hold private parties for the adults, and do some respectable spiritualism instead. There was also a massive influx of Irish, Scottish, and Welsh immigration to the U.S. during this time, making Halloween practices much more popular. Traditional Samhain treats like roasted apples, carameled and candied, along with candied nuts and sweetmeats, were what youngsters would receive during this time. Their costumes show a shift away from the dead and more toward the supernatural. Many of these costumes, including masks, were homemade, and are epically creepy without meaning to be. During the early 1900s, 1911 specifically, we get the first written record of the phrase trick-or-treat in Canada. In the mid-1900s, trick-or-treating experienced a huge boom, thanks to the lifting of sugar rationing from the World Wars, as well as new candy companies wanting to capitalize on the holiday. So there you have it, from ancient feasts for the dead and nature spirits to the modern-day sugar rush of Halloween. Trick-or-treating has experienced few changes because, hey, who doesn't want to demand tasty snacks from strangers? Happy Halloween, everyone.